What's happening? So in this video, we're going to be talking about panning shots and rolling shots and how do you achieve them. And first and foremost, what are panning shots? What are rolling shots? Well, they're photos generally taken by moving objects like cars or bikes or something like that, using a lower shutter speed and creating motion blur to make the subject look like it's absolutely flying. As you can see in these examples, this is the motion blur I'm talking about. You have the subject and it's moving. It's probably only doing 20 kilometers an hour, but it makes it look like it's going really quickly. Who typically uses rolling shots or panning shots? Well, it's normally the car photographer or the street photographer. There are other applications you can use these same settings with, which I'll leave it as a bonus tip right at the end of the video. Let's get into how to do them. So let's talk about gear really quickly. Do you need specific gear for this? Not really. But what I do recommend is be able to be as stable as you can possibly be. So having stabilization in your lens or your body or both is a really good start. Make sure they're turned on. You need to be quite still for the low shutter speed that we're going to be shooting at. Other ways to stabilize is using a camera strap on you, so you can hold the camera out and keep tension between the strap and the neck, and that keeps it very stable. If you don't use a strap like I do, then you can use the EVF, and that gives you 3 points of contact, giving you much more stability. Now let's talk about the settings. What settings are we going to be looking for? So first setting, we want it to be in burst mode. Put your highest burst mode on. It doesn't matter how fast it is really, but having the highest setting is the best. On my Canon RP, it's only like 4 frames per second, so if you have more than that, then that's already really good. Now, if you're doing street photography and you know the speed limit in where you're shooting, the rule of thumb is your shutter speed should equal the speed limit. And now that's only really an imperial thing with miles per hour. Let's say if there's 25 miles per hour speed limit, you want your shutter speed at 1/25. If it's 30 miles per hour, 1/30, 50 miles per hour, 1/50, etc. And if you're like me and use metric, I generally just half that, even though miles I think is like 1.5 times faster, but I find just halving works pretty well. So if there's a 50 kilometer speed limit, I go 1/25, and it works pretty well. Whoa, hold up. I completely forgot to mention that you don't even need to have your shutter speed at 1/50 or 1/25. That's just my safe kind of panning shot range, only because when I'm in the street, that's usually around the speed that the cars are moving at. You can obviously shoot at much lower shutter speeds. You could shoot at 1/8 or 1/4, it doesn't really matter. 1/25 or 1/50 is just a bit more easier to stabilize and make sure you nail a shot. So it's not like a rule or anything, so you can leave that up to you. Here's an image, I think it's 1/8 or something. I'll have the settings there. It's not particularly perfect, but it looks really cool, and it's like, there's so much motion blur going on. So yeah, back to it. So obviously the faster the car, the faster the shutter speed you actually do want. So if there's a car doing 300 kilometers an hour, 1/150. And of course you're probably thinking, if you're doing it in the middle of the day, because you have such a low shutter speed, it's going to be very bright. So you want that f-stop to be bumped right up. Now you're probably thinking you just want the car in focus, but when you're panning with a car or doing rolling shots, if you have the shutter speed right, everything around the car will be completely blurred out, which is the exact effect that we're going for here. So if you have it on f10, it doesn't really matter, as long as the shutter speed's low enough to make that motion blur stand out a lot more. Another setting I do recommend is servo autofocus or continuous autofocus for a lot of other people. And I do want to emphasize that panning and rolling shots have the exact same settings. You're doing exactly the same thing. You're creating motion blur around an object at speed. Now when you're actually going to go shoot these rolling shots, syncing with the speed of the subject before you're actually going to take the shots is probably best practice. And obviously it's the same thing with rolling shots, because you're hanging out of a car and there's a lot of shaking and stuff happening. So hold that burst, let off a heap of shots in order to get the perfect shot. Another quick tip is using wider lenses. Now me personally, I really like telephoto. I like 85mm, I like 200mm. But when doing panning shots, I do find that having a wider focal length is actually makes it look so much more cooler, especially doing street photography and like say a bus comes past and it's literally a meter away from you. It gives this really cool effect where it's only one little slither in focus. And that brings me to the next part. Not all panning shots have to be perfect. Sometimes it looks really cool when it's all a bit crazy and it gives this weird artistic effect. With rolling shots, however, you do want the subjects to be very tack sharp. Another quick tip is shoot horizontally. You can shoot in portrait mode, like vertically, but the more of the subject that's in the frame, the more of the chance you probably get a good photo, and the more of the chance you'll be able to keep track of the car, I find. It can be a bit more difficult shooting in portrait because you're probably cropping half the car out or something like that. Also, I feel like panning shots just look better in landscape, so personal opinion. For rolling shots specifically, make sure the car stays the same speed as the car that you're in. Generally, I like to have the rolling shot car just a little bit behind, so when I'm pointing out, it gives the 3/4 shot that car photographers generally do make. Or you can go on better and have them in front of you as well. But don't let that limit your creativity. You can shoot directly side on, which makes a really cool effect. Remember, photography is very subjective and it's all down to creativity, so you can shoot however you want, but just make sure the car stays the same speed as you. Do recommend using a walkie-talkie or something, or briefing the driver of the car being shot that you need to be the same speed and letting them know that you don't actually have to go that fast to be able to make a really cool photo. This one here specifically was shot at like 30 kilometers an hour. Here's a little bonus tip. You can use these settings for a number of other things, but one thing specifically is capturing motion around a static subject. Someone could be standing still and like a bus is going by, and these same settings apply to that as well. They're doing 50 kilometers an hour and I shoot at 1/25. The subject's going to be completely stationary and then everything's moving around it. All the traffic, the bikes. Creates this effect like someone's motionless while the world moves around him, I guess. And another bonus tip, I actually set custom settings on my dial on top of my camera, which has the same save settings for a panning shot. So when I think something looks cool and it's going to be a good panning shot, I switch it to C1.
Low enough light, I'm
Oh shit, bus. Generally sits at 1/25 f10 auto ISO. So when the time comes and I see something really cool, I switch it to that and adjust the exposure with the f-stop. So that's my only setting that I really tinker with before getting the panning shot that I'm looking for. And then when I'm done, I switch back to manual mode and continue on my days. I personally use manual mode on my camera when I do these settings, but I've seen in other like TikToks and stuff that people are like, oh, that means there's more settings to play with. In the heat of the moment, it becomes harder to adjust all the settings and you might screw up your shots. Well, when I shoot in manual mode, half the time I'm shooting in auto ISO. So realistically, all you're really doing is setting the shutter speed to the speed of the subject and your f-stop a little bit higher, or for people that know, stopping down. And then normally I just keep it in auto ISO. It's fine. If you find it a bit too dark, just lower your f-stop number. It'll be right. You'll get most of it in focus. But if you don't want to shoot in manual, use aperture priority or shutter priority. I recommend shutter priority a little bit more. It means all your other settings will be totally automatic, and all you have to do is make sure your shutter speed is set with the speed of the subject. However, I said shoot in manual. If you know how to shoot in manual, do it in manual. Anyway, I hope this video helps you guys if you really need to know how to shoot panning shots or rolling shots, and you've been wondering about how the hell you get that effect. Just remember, stabilize it, burst mode, match shutter speed with the speed limit or speed of the subject, and sync with the subject as well. I hope that's straightforward enough to you guys. I feel like it isn't. If this has helped you and has opened your eyes into figuring out how to do these type of shots, then let me know below. And if you've nailed a shot because of this video, chuck a like. Just chuck a like on it. Chuck a like on the video. I'm planning on doing a couple more tutorials, so let me know. If this does help you, then it'll probably encourage me more to do it. And if you're keen on finding me somewhere else, I have my Instagram, my website down below, so you can go check that out. Now remember to find frames, and until next time, bye.